So we're here having this emergency podcast
Yeah.
to give the world our opinion on It Chapter 2, released in 2019.
Oh, man. I thought this was about Friday the 13th. Because it's Friday the 13th.
Oh, crap.
But when we posted it.
Yeah.
We recorded this on Friday the 13th.
Yes. But we'll post it soon. But yeah, so we were both super excited about It Chapter 2, and we both went and saw it in theaters, and it is still in theaters now. So you cannot rent it for streaming on Amazon Prime Video or anywhere else currently that's legal, because it's still in theaters and it's fresh and it's only been out for like a week, and we wanted to do an episode, and we haven't talked about it at all. So I'm very interested to hear your thoughts. And I believe you and Katie saw it over the weekend?
Yep, we saw it on Sunday.
Cool. I saw it with Leo on Wednesday night, so it's still pretty fresh for me, and I don't really have like solid notes or anything, but I just figure we could give our general impressions and go from there.
Yeah, I definitely don't have solid notes because I was looking so forward to the movie.
Mm-hmm.
I was just like, I'm just gonna watch this and see what I can remember. Because I feel like we also will add the spoiler to this podcast since the movie's still out. Do you think, or should we?
Nah.
Okay.
If you're listening to this and you haven't seen the movie, you're about to get the movie spoiled. So, abandon ship if you want to.
Yeah.
But first of all, this movie was made on a super high budget. It Chapter 1 did extremely well in theaters, and I would imagine that led to an increased investment in this movie. So everything from the lighting to some of the actors that they got to just sort of the general production, the cameras, the scene changes, it was just done at a really, really high level.
Yeah.
And it was a true, we talked about the first one feeling very different from the original version of it that had been released as like a TV movie, because it was on such a grander scale and it really felt like an actual cinematic event instead of something where you expected commercial breaks and, like an episode of The Days of Our Lives to come on after. And this one was sort of in that same vein, but I also feel like this one had a lot more, or it had a lot of changes to the story, and I feel like it probably had some Hollywoodized script changes that made it, for me, really, really different than what I was expecting.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest difference or the biggest issue I have with this movie, this should kind of sum it all up for me. And I'm going to sum it up at the beginning because that's how I am. I thought that this movie was 2 hours and 14 minutes long.
Uh-huh.
But it's 2 hours and 49 minutes long. And
it felt longer.
It felt so much longer. So much that I was kind of apologized to my brother and sister-in-law for hey, I know we just drove an hour and a half or an hour to get to this theater.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry that we just took up 5 hours of your day, but no, it was good. But yeah, you could definitely tell with the there's almost seemed like a little bit better of a process as far as scene changes and cutting back to the past and going to the future and all that. But as well as they did that, I felt like the CGI was kind of rough at times for me.
It was extremely rough, yeah.
And so it was what did you spend the budget on? I know that in the original or in the TV version, it's obviously pretty rough,
Yeah.
But with this one, I think I just maybe my expectations were a little too high.
Yeah. Same. I had the same feeling, and I feel like going into the first one, I was very apprehensive about it because I was like, this has a lot of potential, but the TV version did a lot of things that I didn't like. And I remember way back when we were talking about it in an episode before we went and saw it and reviewed it, I had mentioned that the thing that they could do that I would like was if they made it just like the first half of the movie without all the flashbacks and flash forwards, focused on, you know, the kids and their sort of like increasing creepiness from the haunting or tormenting or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And then how they sort of came together to try and stop it, and then just kept it at that and made it, you know, sort of a more cohesive storyline where they're all moving towards this difficult task. And then they did that, and then they did it at a really high level, and then it was just a movie that I really, really loved and left the theater, like, excited to go back and see it again. Mm-hmm. And I saw that one in theaters 3 times. Like, I don't do that. That was, like, that movie I liked that much. So with this movie, I'd already gotten this, like, connection with the first one, mm-hmm. and it was done really well, and I really, really liked it. And so, like, I pre-gamed and I rewatched the first one, you know, the night before, and I'm like back in the mode and I'm going in. And then this one for me did a lot of the things that the original movie did that I didn't think worked particularly well.
Right.
And it was just a little bit frustrating because I feel like they had a lot of good ideas for scary scenes that they just tried to pack in whether they really fit or worked with the story or not.
Yeah.
So it ended up having kind of a jerky feeling between scenes. It didn't feel nearly as like cohesive to me as the first one did.
Yeah, and I think I mean, for as much as it did that, and I kind of felt the same way. I kind of think and so like this is actually the first time that I talked to anyone about the movie.
Same.
But I feel like part of the issue for me was it seemed like with the kids, the group of kids, it seemed like that was such a perfect fit. Like they all, there was a great combo. With the adults, and I understand like the story where like it's, you know, they haven't hung out with each other for a long time, so it's kind of getting used to each other. But it didn't seem like there was very much cohesion between the couple, and so that's where I was kind of like having my issues with it, and I was trying to like. I think it definitely had some very great scenes to this, like some really good scenes, and the cutback, and it had I think, you know, had some scenes had a deeper meaning to it.
Oh, absolutely.
But I think just like I do have to say though, like the way that they started this movie off, as far as like the situation that happened with the gay man getting beat.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, that's like, I mean, it's terrible, and you're feeling bad, like you know, I'm feeling awful, and you're like, why is this like, you know, Pennywise is gonna come in here and save him, which is like you want someone like that being saved, and the next thing you know, like Pennywise shows up and like kills the guy, and it's like, oh, all right, it starting fast, and you know, we're gonna get to it.
So for me, that scene was a prime example of a good idea for a scene that didn't get stitched well into the story.
Yeah.
Because Pennywise didn't attack young adults. So why was, and then when he did, it was like him directly messing with them on a psychological level. Yeah. So, like, why was he just hanging out next to the river,
that's a good
hoping
point.
that someone would get thrown in to get eaten? You know what I mean? And so, like, from a movie-making perspective and just, like, the experience of it, that scene was, you know, to your point, like, super compelling, well pulled off, all of the balloons coming out from under the bridge, and, like, it's happening again, you know, with the build-up, that was all really cool. Mm-hmm. But it didn't feel like it was part of the story. So when it cuts, you know, to like the title screen after that, I'm like, wait, why was he attacking an adult? But then that never comes back. It wasn't like that was a new element of the story where now he was, you know, going after young adults visiting Derry or something. So it just,
that's a good point.
And to me, the power of the first movie is that it focused on the kids and how he was uniquely messing with them. And their struggle with that and their fight against it. And I feel like this movie spent a lot of time away from that. Yeah, it didn't work as well for me.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. That makes sense. I didn't even think about it. I kind of thought maybe it was one of those, like, I know what you did last summer, where like, no, this guy is really 15. Mm-hmm. They just hired a 30-year-old actor.
Yeah, maybe that was true.
Kind of thing.
But there were some scenes, I mean, to your point, in the movie that I thought were just really well done that also did fit the story. So, like, when there was that little girl under the bleachers,
Yeah.
And he was in the
Yes.
back,
Yeah.
and he was talking about being ashamed of people making fun of his face, and she had the birthmark on her face, and he's using that to like get trust and to get her, into a dangerous situation. I thought that would have been a great opening scene.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And then there was also the one in that, like the fun house with all the mirrors that Bill saw, where there was the little kid that got attacked. Like, those things matched the story and sort of would have been a good fit for like how things were ramping back up. But there were just other things where, again, I feel like they had good ideas for like really good cinematic experiences of scenes, but didn't necessarily tie them back in to make them feel like they were a flowing part of the movie.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't even think about that. Would have been a good start to it at the football scene with the under the bleachers with the girl.
Because that was brutal.
Yeah. Yeah, it was really brutal. I mean, it's even more brutal because I suffer from having a birthmark that's visible. And I related to her.
Yeah.
I call my birthmark the Crime Stopper, meaning it's got to stop me from crime. Otherwise, I got to cover my neck up.
Oh, actually, that's a great idea.
Yeah. Just a little note for all you criminals out there. Cover up your birthmarks and tattoos.
When you just said you had a visible one, I really had to stop and think.
I know.
I'm like, wait, huh?
He does? Yeah.
It's kind of like, does Stanley have a mustache on The Office?
Yeah. But yeah, I think the other thing, so when Mike's getting the group back together and you're seeing all these people's lives and what they're kind of doing and kind of getting them to agree to come back, even though they didn't technically remember a lot of the stuff that happened to them. For me, I felt like in the first It movie, the 90s It movie, I think I almost felt worse at Stanley's suicide than I did with this one. And it may have been like, I mean, I guess you don't necessarily see it coming in the first one. With this one, it was just like you didn't really have much of a backstory.
Correct.
I think if you watched the first one and then the second one, it would have, you do eventually kind of get that after they start showing Stanley and
the letter.
In the letter, but like also like cut scenes and all that, and like grabbing a personal item for Stanley, which was hairnet, whatever that was. But I think that it kind of missed a couple opportunities that could have like really opened up.
And I think in general, one thing that was kind of hard about it too was the adults didn't really feel like the same characters.
No,
I mean it's like it's 30 years later, so they're different people, and they did do a good job of getting actors and actresses that look similar to the kid actors, but it wasn't. It's 30 years later almost, so you don't have the same tie that you had to the 2.5 hours that you spent with the kids as they were going through a thing. And then you get introduced to the new people, but they're constantly cutting back to the kids, which still feel like different people, and then back to the future. And so it was just like anytime there was like build up or character development or anything of the people in the present, it feels like you kind of got out of that because it cut through like a long cut scene of the past. And there were some places where that was cool and it made sense. Like they're all coming back to Derry, they're regaining their memories, they're reliving, these childhood experiences. And so when it cuts between, Bill on his bike as a grown up and then it flashes back to him on his bike as a kid and some stuff like that was cool, and that was a good visual effect, and it was a nice way of like visually conveying what was happening and what the characters would be seeing. But then there are the ones where it just cuts back to them like in the woods, and they're like, oh well, we had this idea for a scene about a clubhouse, so I guess now we need an extended flashback of them building the clubhouse since we didn't include that in the first movie. And just some stuff like that where it's like that added so much. It was like it added 20 minutes of movie time to try and make up for the fact that they wanted to do something that wasn't set up in the first movie. So
yeah, I could have saved a lot of time there. I think there was also like a scene or two that they wanted to put in the first movie and they ended up doing it as a flashback. I read that a couple places, but I was kind of hesitant on getting facts about this movie because it's so new.
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
You know, it's just like who knows. But yeah, I think the flashbacks, like just like you said, sometimes it kind of helped the situation. Other times it didn't.
Yeah, I think I definitely would have preferred a more like linear movie in all of them coming together in Derry and then working together and really focusing on them like in the present in their fight against Pennywise instead of all the moving around in time.
Yeah.
But one thing I did like about it was this movie had a lot of Pennywise, and I feel like you got more of him in this movie than you did in the previous one, and came to understand him a little bit better, and just he was on the screen a lot more and was like violent and scary a lot more.
Yeah, I think that the scenes where he was like normal and not the at the end version of Pennywise, I think it was still the same creepy old clown that was there. I actually kind of felt like he should have been shown a little bit more throughout the movie. I kind of felt like there were a lot of scenes where it's like they could have just popped him in for something.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's, you know, I guess, you know, they have the whole library scene in the original movie where he really messes with them, and it just kind of wanted some more of that. But I just enjoy his character. Like I enjoy him, Bill, however you pronounce his last name, as Pennywise. That I was like, you know, just show him off. But
yeah, for sure. And I mean, like, huge applause to him for taking on that role the way that he has, because following up sort of the classic version, I mean, that was a tall order, and he has really made it his own and excelled with it. So yeah. Did you see the picture that was going around online of, I guess, Bill Hader was asking him like how they did the effect with his eyes kind of going to the side, and then he's like, oh well, I can just do that, and he was like, haha, yeah, right. And then in the full like makeup and costume, he did it, and then you see like they actually have like pictures from the set where Bill is just like running away in fright, and it was amazing. For the record, like, Bill Hader kind of stole the show for me. Oh yeah,
it was a win. I mean, like, where some of the other characters seemed like it was kind of like almost like they didn't care about the job. It seemed like Bill Hader just took it and ran, and like the comedy felt natural because he's a comedian. The acting was natural. I mean, it was so good. The other thing, I watched an interview where he talked about, or where they talked about how he had to basically kind of teach him. He was hesitant to do a horror movie because like his natural reaction to something scaring him is actually smiling. Like it's like a like a smile, which I mean that's kind of common. But he kind of had to teach himself how to do that for the horror movie because it's because of a natural reaction. So and his role. One thing I liked about Richie as a kid, I think Richie was that character's name. I might be confusing myself. Richie.
As a kid, he was just constantly making jokes, and sometimes they were funny, and sometimes they absolutely weren't. But it was like he was that guy that everybody has in their friend group growing up, who is just always trying to like get a laugh. Yeah. And then I thought that the way that kid played the role, and then the way that Bill played the role in this movie was just so spot on. I mean, it was just such like a natural grown-up version of that that I really liked how true it was kind of to that original character. And I think that he felt more like a grown-up version of the character you got to know in the previous movie than any of the others.
Well, and it's more of a grittier comedy that he has. And so like in the first one it was kind of like that, but the comedian that they got for it just didn't fit. So like it was just it was able to be portrayed very well, and that might have been why it was such a win for Bill. But you never know.
All right, you gotta hold on just a second. So I've talked before about how this room where I record is haunted. So I'm sitting here and the lights just went off and the fan just came on full blast.
Really?
And I'm actually kind of cold, so give me a second so I can turn the switch off, and maybe that'll kill it. Okay, that seems to be working. So I'm just sitting here in the dark alone now. But anyway, but yeah. So I haven't. I guess. Long story short, quick summary is there were a lot of things I liked about the movie. I definitely liked this movie way better than like Midsummer or several of the other movies that have come out this year. But it to me didn't live up to the first. And I think if I had seen this one first and gone in like skeptical, then maybe I would have liked it more. But it just felt like it tried to do too much and dragged on a little bit and lost momentum. But there were still a lot of really good scenes.
I think the thing is if we're comparing this chapter 1, chapter 2, which because they go together, but we're not saying it's necessarily a bad movie. It's just chapter 1 was better. I mean, like I don't think that's a bad thing to say at all.
Yeah,
and I think like chapter 1 pulled off like the bully. Henry Bowers.
Henry Bowers. Yeah.
Yeah, like the bully. I felt like in the first episode was pulled off. The first chapter was pulled off great. Like,
yeah.
He was an actual bully. In this one, it was just like, it almost seemed like a small subplot. Like,
it didn't go anywhere at all, and they did a poor job of tying it back in. I would guess that there were probably more scenes around that got cut because it was already so long.
Yeah, I mean, like he stabs Eddie in the mouth. I mean, there was that anticipation because you knew he was getting out. You were just kind of wondering when and where he was going to attack. But I mean, I just think it just wasn't done great. Yeah,
and if I recall from talking to Russell, because he read the book a couple of years ago, I believe that Henry Bowers played a much larger role in the book. And so I would imagine that there was originally a plan to have him featured more prominently in this movie, but I bet that was one of the things they just had to edit down for time.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I just don't like Russell. But I liked Stephen King's cameo.
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty fun.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I was the guy in the theater because we watched this Sunday at 11. And we were in the balcony of the theater, and I was the guy who's like telling everyone like, "Hey, that's Stephen King," and like they were all like, "Yeah, we know you, you idiot." It's Stephen King. The director also had a cameo in it too, though. He was a customer at the pharmacy.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yep, Andy Muschietti. I don't know words.
I'm sure that's how I pronounce it.
With a laugh at the end.
Yeah.
I think one thing I enjoyed about this movie is it had that Stephen King fall movie,
for
fall
sure,
feeling movie,
like fall in New England.
Yes, yeah. It's just like it makes you want to go, go to the north and northeast and just like Maine or something and just kind of, I don't know, but it embraced that feeling. I know we've talked about it a couple of times where like. With movies in the past where it's like, oh, that definitely felt like a fall movie that we watched and pull that off.
So I don't really pay attention to the outside world all that much. But I haven't heard anybody talk about this movie at all.
I haven't really.
I don't have any idea how it's doing at the box office. I don't know if it's generally getting positive or negative reviews or anything. And so since I'm seeing it almost a full week after it came out, I was kind of curious what it would be like in the theater. And it was, granted, it was Alamo Drafthouse, but it was still like 8:30 on a Wednesday, and it was packed.
Oh, cool.
I mean, the whole thing was like sold out. And so, and watching a horror movie with a full audience who's all excited to be there is generally a pretty fun experience. It makes it more enjoyable.
See, we watched it in the balcony, and there was the four of us and like 5 people behind us, and no one was in the bottom area. And so it was kind of weird where I was like, man, I hope people want to see this because we do a horror podcast. We want to see horror movies succeed at the box office, so you get more of them. Just looking at IMDb, though, it has a 7.1 rating and
not bad
out of 50,000 rates. Wow. And Rotten Tomatoes, the one that actually matters, the audience score has 80%.
Oh, nice.
Out of 17,000. So.
Cool. Yeah, but I say I like watching with the full theater, but when we first sat down, it was looking like the 2 seats next to me were going to be open.
Oh, yeah.
So lights had already gone down, previews were on and stuff, and I'm like, yeah, I get that sweet armrest all to myself because I have long arms, and so they kind of overflow. Like there's just no comfortable way for me to sit like normal in a seat that's like that, or like on an airplane or anything.
Or get shirts that are.
Oh yeah, that don't even try. So we're getting settled in. You know, I've ordered my popcorn. We're ready to go, and previews are starting. And then I see this couple walk in together, and then I see them walking like towards our row, and I'm like, okay, well somebody's sitting there. That's fine. You know, they got their tickets. As they get closer, and I'm not saying this in a judgy way. I'm saying this in like I observed it type way.
Yeah.
But it's like the girl was in kind of one of those like almost looked like a hand sewn type dress, and then had like the hair like kind of pulled up but then like shaved on the sides, and like head tattoos with like sun, moon, star, you know, just like super hippie, like super hippie, and like the hemp bag, and then the guy who was with her looked real normal, but then he turned and then I saw he had like that, like the normal haircut, but on the side of your head you have like that one nasty long dreadlock. So here's the thing. If you want to be a vegan, I fully support you. I don't feel compelled to be a vegan, but I support you in your decision if you want to do that. Yeah. If you want to like spend money on crystals and read about like, you know, the waves of the universe and harmony with nature, you know what? That's not for me, but I'm happy that you have the freedom to do it. In general, I don't have to agree with a person or think that the way that they live their life is something that I want to live in order to still like support them as a person. Like, people are different. That's a great thing about the world and the country that we live in, especially, is people can live different ways, and that's cool. But there is no damn excuse for going to a movie in a theater with other people where you're sitting shoulder to shoulder and not putting on deodorant. For God's sake.
I knew
they came in and sat down, and I was like, it smells like something died. And it was so bad, man. Like, I was like leaning forward because that made it like slightly better. Like, when the servers would walk by, that would kind of kick the air up so it wasn't quite so bad. And it was a very, very unique experience. And generally, it was like it made the movie experience worse, except for this movie had scenes where they were in the sewer, and then it actually enhanced it. It was like smell-o-vision, so it wasn't a complete loss.
Well, and also it was 2 hours and 49 minutes long through that. So you're more of a man than I am, because I probably would have left and texted you, been like, "Hey, man, podcast next week." Yeah. What would you say if you? I mean, do you have like a favorite scene specifically out of it, or was it the one like under the bleachers with the girl?
No, I don't think that was my favorite. I did like that, but the things that really stood out to me, like in my memory of the scenes, were. And I'm not going to answer your question directly. I'm just going to tap dance over here for a minute.
That's okay.
And unless maybe I think of something better. I really, really loved a lot of the scene changes towards the beginning, especially where they were going like between locations and between times. It just seemed like every scene change was really well thought out and very artfully done. And I thought that was just a cool thing to add that didn't necessarily have to be there. I also liked that there were a lot of... It felt like almost they set up the scenes of the different characters in their day-to-day lives that were showing that the way that Pennywise had tormented them was like a thing they'd never fully escaped.
Yeah.
So like Beverly and her husband was basically just, you know, the way that her dad had been. And I want to say Richie, but that's not right. Eddie basically married his mom, you know, a person that was very similar. And, you know, they've all gone on and had these lives and like moved on and forgotten about it, but like all of that stuff from their childhood has still stuck with them this whole time. And on a certain level, it's the you know, from a supernatural perspective, it's, you know, Pennywise still has some hold. They didn't actually defeat him. But on the other hand, if you look at sort of some of the underlying themes of the movie or the book and how all of that works together, I just thought that was incredibly well done, and I'm glad that they took the time to show them a little bit in their lives outside of Derry in the future, because I felt like that set up a really good like need for them to feel compelled to come back and deal with it.
Well, that's very good, and a very good positive for me to bring up this negative.
Okay.
They killed Pennywise by making fun of it.
I just wasn't going to bother talking about the ending.
I mean, it was just like, come on, man. Like,
Yeah.
Still, I mean, I understand that that's probably how it went in the book. But it was just like, it was building up for, like...
Some kind of grand final fight, yeah.
Yeah, but I was just like, oh, man, that's...
But the fact that he wasn't a giant claymation spider also was a big improvement on the previous movie, so...
Well, that CGI was rough. I think with me, so there's a scene where Pennywise is standing. I think it's with the scene where, hold on, where Beverly goes to her old home.
Yeah.
And Pennywise is there, and like he puts on like the clown white, and then
it was like
cuts his face with his fingernails, like,
yes.
and the blood's kind of dripping. I was like, that's cool. Like,
yes.
I like that specifically. It's like I wanted more of that.
Yes.
In this movie, you know.
Yeah, that was super intense and a very, very good scene.
Yeah, I think it would have been cool. Honestly, like it. I don't know. I kind of wish that. I guess my thing with this movie is definitely enjoyed it. I just kind of wish it was a continuation of the kids when they were younger dealing with Pennywise, except for like you know, maybe like a bigger sequence between the beginning and end of chapter 1.
Yeah.
Just because that turned out pretty well.
Well, and I would have been okay too. What I had hoped for this movie was that it would just be them as adults and not all the flashbacks, and that you would get to know the characters as adults in the same way that you had when they were kids, you know? Yeah. But yeah, and I also, the other thing, so two things that stood out to me a lot that I didn't like about the original movie was it felt disjointed because of all the flashbacks and flash forwards, and it felt like it lost momentum a lot because of that. The other thing was the visual effects were just distractingly bad sometimes in the original, and like that scene where they're at the Chinese restaurant and all the fortune cookies start moving around like bugs.
Yeah,
I felt like that was like Star Wars Episode 1 level graphics. Like, it was just not convincing and kind of absurd, and it was distractingly bad, which really takes you out of the heat of the moment.
Yeah. Whereas like, or you know, where like if it didn't have the first chapter being so well, this movie might you know not have. Yep.
But anyway, so I know that we've pointed out a lot of the stuff that we were disappointed by, but in general, it still wasn't a bad movie. I mean, it was still worth seeing. It's still nice that they continued the story and that you got to see all the characters again and kind of conclude it. And so, we'll see. But I'm realizing more and more that It Chapter 1 from a couple years ago is not just one of my like favorite recent horror movies. Like, it might just be one of my favorite movies. It may be on that list, you know, with like 28 Days Later, where like horror or not, it's just one that I'm always going to kind of come back to.
Yeah. I like Showgirls. I think that's your favorite movie.
And Striptease is yours.
Yeah, you're damn right. Watched that when I was 9 years old. Got me through a lot of hard times.
And we're done.